We now move to our next keynote speech, which is from Stephen Welton, the chair of the British Business Bank. Stephen will be familiar to everybody in this room as somebody with an enormously distinguished career in our industry. I think particularly well known as the founding CEO of the Business Growth Fund, an enormous success story that has been replicated elsewhere around the world, and is now chair of the British Business Bank, a role he has held since October 2023. As everybody here will know, the BBB is a vital part and an increasingly important part of the ecosystem here in the UK, and one which embodies many of the points that we have been discussing this morning. Can you please welcome him to the stage?
Thank you, Miles. It's a great pleasure to be here for your conference. Obviously, an important day on lots of different fronts. There's a very generous introduction from Miles. I suppose the relevance is I have been involved in investment in UK smaller companies and high growth for most of my career. And I'm very privileged to now be chair of the British Business Bank. You will all know something about the bank. I'm going to try and sort of distill that into the sort of simple, clear objectives we have. With the country's economic development bank, which means we're funded by government, we're nationally relevant because we're trying to help small companies right across the United Kingdom with a strong focus on SMEs. And if you think of the bank as the way in which government tries to translate policy to support companies across that very broad spectrum of SMEs, from the small local regional businesses to the high growth technology businesses, it's a very broad canvas. And what we've tried to do is to bring a lot more simplicity to our offer. And how do we do that? We've moved from what historically were 20 plus different programs reflecting different government initiatives with allocations of capital to something much simpler. We now have a banking division and an investment division. The banking division, very relevant obviously, well both are relevant to this audience. The banking division's role is essentially to facilitate through others the flow of credit into the economy. And we do that by working with a broad range of financial institutions, the non-bank financial institutions, so that will include asset-based lenders, challenger banks and others, really reflecting on the tougher credit environment for small companies, the lack of capacity in that end of the market and the need to do more. And perhaps the biggest litmus test, I suppose, of policy in action, and we track this every 6 months, is that over 2/3 now of funding for SMEs is provided by non-bank financial institutions and challenger banks. That's a big shift that's occurred over the course of the last 10 years, very much working on the premise that greater diversity of choice is a good thing for small companies. Specialist lenders bring with them specialist sector knowledge, and that enables SMEs to find the right lender for them. And the bank facilitates that through the use of guarantees and some funded programs as well. We look at that collectively, that supports over £10 billion worth of lending across the country. And the bank in this part of its activity is supporting tens of thousands of UK smaller companies. And that's a bedrock, obviously, for any economy. And it's very clear as to how that intervention can work. It's well established. It was obviously scaled up dramatically during COVID through all the COVID loan guarantee schemes. You then move on to the investment division. That's got a very particular focus. It's dealing with a smaller number of companies, but these are the very high growth, innovative companies that are very much going to drive the future of the UK economy and the global economy. Though when I talk to people about the bank, the fact that surprises people most is that the British Business Bank is the largest investor in venture capital in the country, with roughly a 20% market share. The reason that's important is that the UK has the third largest venture capital industry in the world after the US and after China. So whilst we are obviously looking collectively at some of the challenges in the economy, let's not lose sight of the fact that we are incredibly well positioned in the most important sector of the economy for the future, namely technology in all of its different guises, which will affect businesses, small and large. And if we look at what the bank is trying to do here, one of our key objectives is to be catalytic. So what do I mean by that? Why is there a role for government here? And our view is that the UK venture capital industry, notwithstanding the fact that it's the third largest, is still too small. We want it to be bigger, and we want fundamentally for more institutional investors to be supporting this asset class. If we compare the UK with the US, less than 10% of UK pension fund assets are invested in venture capital. That's over 70% in the US. You don't need much of a shift to have a dramatic impact on the economy. And that's in a way why the bank has got such a significant share today. Success for us will be not the bank continuing to get bigger, but the institutions beginning to take a greater share. And how are we doing that? We're being a catalyst here by making funds bigger. Our Chief Investment Officer describes a barbell strategy. At one end of that strategy, you want some funds to get larger, which means they can make bigger individual investments, they can employ more people, they can develop more specialist knowledge. If I look in the last few weeks alone, we are now making limited partner or LP investments of 100 billion plus. That is significantly greater than the bank has ever done. Last week at Tech Week, the Chancellor announced the biggest investment to date. It's £150 million to help bring over a US specialist deep tech hardware VC from Silicon Valley called Playground, where we are committing 150 million as they try to raise 500 million. These are capabilities that are very nascent. There are very few people in the US, let alone in the UK, with that expertise. The exciting thing is that the UK is very much at the forefront of this. 2 weeks ago, we made the largest direct investment the bank has made in its 12-year history. That was £100 million into Oxford Quantum Circuits, a spin-out from Oxford University. That was out of a £260 million round. And in quantum computing, the UK has a really strong strategic position. So we are trying to harness what you will hear politicians talk about regularly, the strength of our academic and institutions with all of the IP that is being created to more company formation and, crucially, to help those companies to scale up. Just to give you, again, a sense of momentum, we've invested directly into companies. This is alongside venture capital funds, 500 million now. That has increased by more than double in just over the last year. So there's a real sense of pace. It's very relevant, I think, to the title of this conference and what the City UK is looking at, No Time to Lose. I think I would translate No Time to Lose into action today. So a key priority from government to us and to other economic institutions is the time for action is now. When you look at it in the context of technology and the pace of change, it's absolutely critical, and you can see why that is important. Thinking about fintech and the financial sector, a crucial part of the UK economy, one of the government's 8 industrial sectors, and just picking up on some of the comments from the last panel, for fintech to be successful, we clearly need the fintechs in the first place. So we need the innovation, we need the bright people coming up with new ideas, of which we have plenty. We also need the right regulatory support. That's a crucial enabler. We all know that, and clearly a big focus of City UK, and we need the right technology. The UK has all of those ingredients. Our ability is to play that hand much more successfully, and we are doing that. Again, interesting reflection on the bank. We have now backed, through our various fund managers, 2/3 of all of the unicorns that have been created in the UK, including, of course, in the fintech sector. Companies that are well known to all of us, Revolut, Monzo, Go Cardless. And our objective and our desire from the British Business Bank standpoint, and I'm sure from government, is that not only can we help in the creation of these businesses, which we are doing well, which is the start here, but the stay here and scale up here, which the Chancellor uses as a regular mantra, is where we need to pay a lot more attention. We are starting. We don't have enough examples of companies staying here and scaling here, and that is very much a core part of the bank's objectives. So how are we going to do that? Some really simple things, just by more clearly signposting what we do, and crucially, what we don't do. The bank is here in a very targeted way to support things, whether that is supporting lending to a broad range of small companies or supporting the UK venture capital industry. It's important that we can easily say what we don't do and do it quickly. The bank, like all public institutions, and I would say private institutions, needs to look at how it delivers, how it interacts with the market, how it takes feedback, and we're very much trying to do that now. So very practically, in April of this year, we set up something called VentureLink. This is a very simple idea. If the bank is investing in a fund or in a company, it then signposts that we're investing in that company. It shouldn't be a national secret. It's something that we have identified as an interesting opportunity. It doesn't mean we or the government is guaranteeing it's going to be a good investment. It does mean we've done a lot of due diligence. Making that known and then making that diligence available to others, specifically now thinking about pension funds, is a way to give them the access that we have as a bank for them to make their own decisions. That has already been welcomed not just by the institutions, but crucially by the venture capital industry. They see this as a way of curating access into the big source of capital, and something we see a lot of potential on as we start to talk much more specifically with pension funds. You will have all have heard over the last few years about the Mansion House Accords and various different variations on that. You may well have heard as well from some that the pace of change there is too slow. It takes time to work with pension funds to both convince them about the strengths of this asset class and also how to gear up to get more involved. And the bank can be, and is trying to be, creative in doing that, whether it is sharing of knowledge or also looking at things for the first time. We became regulated last year. I can tell you as a government institution, it's probably harder rather than easier to be regulated, as it should be. Why did we do that? Because we set up something called the Investment Services Regulated Arm. Our first fund is the British Growth Partnership. That is designed with pension funds in mind, and clearly if we're marketing that to third parties, we need to be regulated. That is a significant change for us as an institution. It's also a significant change to think about the government as a potential investment manager on behalf of others. I think the exciting news in terms of progress is that we got to the first close of that fund, 200 million at the end of March, and through 3 external parties supporting that are M&G, NatWest, Cushman, and Aegon, and that's the master trust of Aegon. These are exactly the sort of institutions that when we talk about institutions getting invested, we are talking about. We're now focusing on the second close, and there are other institutions, obviously, we're talking to. That is a step. It's obviously not in and of itself enough, but it is a significant step. And we all know, particularly in this audience, in financial services, you can have a great idea. There needs to be implemented well. And the implementation is sometimes complex and time-consuming. Having gone through this process, we're very much thinking about what does the second fund look like, the third fund look like, coming out of that regulated entity. So perhaps just sort of bringing this all to a sort of conclusion, very much reflecting on the world that we're living in today. If we talk about resilience and a secure economy, in my view, it has to be good at venture and supporting innovation. And you can see that in the context of what's happening in the world of defense. That makes really good economic sense. It makes really good national security sense. And these are not mutually exclusive concepts, and you can see that. So for the UK to be resilient, we will need to continue to invest in these high-growth, innovative companies. That also creates a lot of opportunities in the supply chain for the smaller companies that are going to support these industries of the future. So our mandate and our role as a bank is very much to sort of help companies grow and stay in the UK. And we're going through our own transformation as we've simplified the message to government. We secured last autumn in the spending review a 2/3 increase in the financial capacity of the bank. It's now over 25 billion. That is very significant in the context of the sort of fiscal environment that we live in. It's enabling us to increase our annual pace of investment again by 2/3. So just looking in recent weeks since the beginning of this financial year, our first quarter is considerably greater than the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of the year before. So momentum and pace is important. And that is not a question of deploying capital at speed. I think it's responding to considerable opportunities. If we reflect on SpaceX last week, which I think is now 50% up on its flotation price, there is a lot happening in the UK, and the UK is very well placed to do that. So what are you going to see more of from the bank? We're constantly trying to get feedback of how we can do things better. Being a large capital allocator, of course, everybody wants to talk to the bank. Where we support them, they love us. If we don't support them, they don't love us quite as much. That's the nature of making choices as an investment organization. You will see the bank making more larger investments into UK growth funds. We will continue to make small investments into emerging managers because we need to make sure in 10 years' time we have the future managers of the future. You will see us making more significant direct investments into strategically important UK companies. These are decisions that are not made by the board of the British Business Bank. They're made by the investment committee that sits in the engine room of the bank, again, as you would expect in an investment management organization. We actively work with government in terms of industrial strategy and in terms of their place-based strategy, because the benefit of this investment will lead to greater growth, and that growth needs to be shared across the economy. And going back to the point about urgency, momentum, no time to lose, we will deliver at more speed, because that is not only what the economy wants, that is very much the competitive world that we're living in. If we don't do things, others will. I'll perhaps just finish with one. It's not an apocryphal story, because it's a true story. For years, we've been talking about ARM, and why did ARM not list in the UK? And I'm not going to open up that debate, but there is a sort of a sense of a missed opportunity. That's been superseded by DeepMind's. Why is DeepMind's not a British public company? It's obviously the core of Google. Well, perhaps there is an opportunity coming right in front of us now. One of the co-founders of DeepMind is Professor David Silver at UCL. He has recently set up a company called Ineffable Energy, and that business has just raised over $1 billion. That's the largest seed round ever raised in Europe. And this is very much in the area of superintelligence, which is computers effectively training themselves. That was led by Sequoia Capital, which is obviously a doyen of venture capital, NVIDIA, and a number of other international institutions, with the British Business Bank, and then with another part of government, Sovereign AI. The good thing is that that's a UK company with UK talent. It's a good thing they're raising so much capital. The challenge is that outside of the British Business Bank, there was very, very little UK domestic capital. Now, that has got to be an opportunity. It's created here, but not sufficiently backed here. Thank you very much for your time.